No one in Reagan National Airport noticed anything unusual at first. It was just another weekday morning in Washington, D.C. Briefcases clicking on the polished floors, baristas pouring lattes, and the ambient hum of announcements echoing through marble walls. But for one man, the moment he stepped into the sleek first-class lounge, it wasn't just another flight. Julian Hayes stood tall, dressed in a precisely cut navy Tom Ford suit that hung perfectly on his athletic frame. The smooth platinum lapel pin on his jacket reflected the lounge lights as he glanced at the check-in counter. He carried himself with a grace born not just of wealth, but of relentless perseverance. But none of that mattered to Cheryl Banning. She didn't see the quiet strength in his eyes or the legacy in his stride. What she chose to see was a black man she believed didn't belong. Her gaze narrowed, not out of security concern, but with the clinical focus of someone whose prejudice masqueraded as professionalism. Security, she called in a tone hushed enough to seem polite, but loud enough to let everyone hear. The word dropped like a match on dry tinder. Within minutes, uniformed personnel approached, their faces blank with procedural duty. Julian didn't flinch. He'd been here before, not this lounge, but this moment. The moment when dignity met disbelief. They asked him to step aside. He did. They questioned his credentials. He provided them. They doubted his platinum frequent flyer card. He showed them a Nothera Centurion card, the kind reserved for the highest tier of clientele. But still, Cheryl pressed. This ticket, she muttered to the security officer, might not be his. Her tone laced with contempt. He probably found it or was given it. Julian's jaw tensed. Not because of her words, but because he had heard them before many times in many forms. Then came the old man in the golf shirt. He grinned at Julian from across the lounge and called out with an ugly chuckle, "Coach is that way." Julian gave no reply. Instead, he calmly opened his leather portfolio, adjusted the platinum cufflinks Mentos from the day his company closed its first billion-dollar deal, and made a quiet call. Protocol Raven. Observation mode. Engage. That was all he said. They escorted him out of the lounge like a misbehaving child. The room watched, most in silence. One young airport staffer, Noah Bryant, an intern who had been tracking Julian's innovations for years, stood frozen. He knew who Julian was. Knew that the man being dragged away was the founder and CEO of Neural Axis, the AI powerhouse whose algorithms powered much of the airport's infrastructure itself. But none of that mattered in that moment. What mattered was that Julian Hayes was black, and that in Cheryl Banning's world, that meant he didn't belong. Outside, a black Bentley purred to a stop. Julian's longtime driver, Marcus, stepped out. "Will you need help with your bags, mister?" "Hayes." Julian shook his head. "Just the carry-on. I travel light these days." As they re-entered the terminal, eyes followed them, some in shame, some in curiosity. No one said a word. At the security office, Greg Holloway, a retired Marine turned head of airport security, met Julian with a skeptical look but a respectful tone. "Sir, there's been some confusion. May I see your credentials?" Julian handed over everything: ID, boarding pass, and his Centurion card again. Greg reviewed them. They were, of course, flawless. Still, Cheryl Banning stood firm, whispering conspiratorially to a younger agent that Julian was some tech guy with too much attitude. Greg's jaw ticked. But he didn't argue. Instead, he gave Julian a nod of apology and returned his belongings. "You're clear to board, Mr. Hayes. Sorry for the inconvenience." Julian smiled faintly. "You're not the one who should be apologizing." Outside, Noah texted furiously to a friend. They just kicked Julian Hayes out of the first-class lounge. For no reason. Literally none. "I heard her. She said he doesn't look the part. This is real." Meanwhile, across the country in San Francisco, Leah Okoye, director of global security at Neural Axis and former CIA cyber intelligence officer, received the call. Protocol Raven. Full engagement. She didn't flinch. She'd been waiting for that trigger. Leah wasn't just security. She was the storm. And she knew that this was more than a PR disaster. It was a chance to pull the curtain back on an empire of corporate injustice. She opened her secure tablet and began the breach. Regulus Airways, the company whose logo had flown across the skies for decades, was about to meet its reckoning. Their hidden offshore accounts, their falsified maintenance logs, their history of buried sexual harassment claims, their discrimination patterns documented, time-stamped, suppressed. Leah would make sure the world saw them all. Julian boarded his flight silently. He gave the flight attendant a nod, settled into his seat, and closed his eyes. But he wasn't resting. He was counting down. Noah's tweet had already gone viral. A grainy cell phone video surfaced showing Cheryl Banning accusing Julian of fraud while he stood motionless, dignified, and unyielding. Major news outlets began picking up the story within hours. By the time Julian's plane landed, hashtags were trending. Regulus racism, fly while black, Hayes versus hate. Regulus Airways issued a statement. We are committed to diversity and inclusion. This was an isolated misunderstanding. Julian didn't respond. He let Leah and her team do the talking through data leaks, whistleblower tips, and quiet alliances. Noah passed along internal emails from Regulus staff. Greg Holloway, after rewatching the footage, resigned in protest and contacted a civil rights firm. And Leah? She turned the digital scalpel to surgical settings. Booking systems failed. Executive emails leaked. A file appeared anonymously on the desks of the SEC, the FAA, and the Department of Transportation. By week's end, CEO Richard Wickham was facing congressional inquiry. His attempt to downplay the incident failed spectacularly when it was revealed that Regulus had knowingly maintained separate policies for high-profile passengers policies that included extra screening for non-traditional travelers. At a late-night meeting in San Francisco, Julian sat across from Evelyn Brooks, his former mentor and the first black female CTO in Silicon Valley. She poured him a glass of red wine. They finally poked the lion, she said. Julian chuckled. No. They reminded me why I built this empire. At Regulus headquarters, chaos reigned. The board suspended Wickham. Share prices plummeted 43% in 3 days. Leah's team released documents proving financial fraud, falsified safety audits, and offshore accounts linked to human trafficking through a charter subsidiary. The fallout was seismic. And yet Julian wasn't done. He made a final offer to Regulus shareholders. Coal Air, a new subsidiary of Neural Axis, would buy out Regulus at 50% over market value. Not to destroy it. To rebuild it. To protect the 28,000 employees who had nothing to do with the corruption. In a dramatic emergency meeting, Wickham tried to resist. But when federal agents arrived at his home with a subpoena and news crews filmed his departure in handcuffs, the board voted unanimously. Regulus Airways would become Coal Air. In his first press conference, Julian stood at the podium with Leah, Noah, Erica, the one staffer who stood up to Cheryl, and Greg beside him. This is not a story of revenge, he said. This is a story of transformation. He pledged $50 million to support STEM programs in underserved communities. He personally reinstated employees suspended for speaking up. And on the first official Coal Air flight, he boarded with no security escort, no entourage, just a worn leather briefcase and a quiet smile. The same gate where he was once humiliated now had a plaque in his honor. As the jet soared into the clouds, he closed his eyes, not in retreat, but in peace. Because in the story of Julian Hayes, justice didn't ride coach. It flew first class.